Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Ready to unpack some of today's top news stories?
Absolutely. Feels like a lot's happening as usual.
Yeah, February 17th, 2025. Lots to cover, from politics and energy to international affairs. Where should we even begin?
Well, how about we kick things off with the Trump administration's federal funding freeze? It's causing quite a bit of controversy, impacting everything from climate initiatives to environmental justice programs.
And lawsuits, too, right? I read about one in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's a big one. Governor Shapiro's claiming the administration overstepped its bounds, froze over $1.2 billion for those climate and infrastructure projects.
He's not happy about it. Says it jeopardizes crucial projects and jobs. Pennsylvania isn't the only one feeling the squeeze, though.
True, the U.S. Forest Service is also seeing cutbacks. They're losing a good chunk of their workforce.
10%, I think I read, something called the Fork in the Road program.
Right, a 10% reduction, that translates to about 3,400 employees. They're trying to shift resources towards wildfire prevention, but it does raise concerns about their ability to manage everything else.
Forest management is such a big job. Timber production, land restoration. Think they can handle it all with fewer people, especially with climate change making wildfires worse.
That's a valid question. And speaking of climate change, let's zoom out to the global scene. Some international tensions brewing around energy and the environment.
Yeah, Brazil's been in the news, right? President Lula and that whole Amazon oil exploration thing.
It's definitely stirring up controversy, especially since Brazil's supposed to host that big UN climate summit this year, COP30.
Right, where the whole focus is supposed to be moving away from fossil fuels.
Exactly. Lula argues that the oil money is crucial for funding their clean energy transition, but environmental groups are worried. Really worried.
Understandably, the Amazon rainforest is kind of important for, well, the whole planet.
It's a tough situation balancing environmental protection with economic development. It's a theme we're seeing pop up elsewhere too, like in Ontario, Canada. Premier Ford is facing scrutiny for his energy plan. Seems to be leaning heavily on nuclear and natural gas.
I saw that, and critics are saying it's not exactly a recipe for a sustainable future.
Yeah, the argument is that relying on nuclear and natural gas could hold them back from switching to renewables, lock them into higher emissions, especially with electricity demand expected to skyrocket.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, are we truly committed to a clean energy future, or are we just paying lip service?
And while we're talking about shifting priorities, have you been following the lead up to the German election? Seems like climate policy has taken a bit of a backseat there.
That's surprising. Germany used to be a real leader on climate action. What happened?
A few things, apparently. Seems like there's some public fatigue with activist tactics, plus economic anxieties and the rise of those far-right parties who aren't too concerned about climate change.
So it's a mixed bag globally, some pushing forward, some dragging their feet.
Definitely complex. And to add to the mix, there's a controversy brewing up north in Alberta, Canada. Accusations that the energy regulator there is underreporting oil spill data.
Oil spills. That's serious. What's the story there?
Well, independent researchers are claiming the real numbers are way higher than what's being reported, raising concerns about transparency and, the actual impact on the environment.
Especially in a place like Alberta, with the oil sands being such a massive source of oil.
It's raising questions about the effectiveness of those environmental protections they have in place and what the long-term consequences of all those unreported spills might be.
It's unsettling when information about something as crucial as oil spills might not be completely transparent. But let's move on for now to some of the latest scientific discoveries. There are always new findings that are shaping our understanding of the world, right?
Absolutely. Some really fascinating stuff. For instance, you know how everyone's been talking about those record-breaking global temperatures? Well, there's a possible link to declining cloud cover.
Wait, really? Less cloud cover means higher temperatures? That's counterintuitive.
It is, right? 2 recent studies have suggested that with fewer low clouds, the Earth's reflectivity is actually decreasing, meaning more sunlight and heat get absorbed.
Huh.
Researchers think it actually contributed to about 0.2 degrees Celsius of that record-breaking heat in 2023, and the worry is that it could create a feedback loop.
So the hotter it gets, the fewer cloud we have. And that just keeps making it hotter.
Exactly. It's a bit of a vicious cycle.
Yikes. See, this is what I mean about constantly uncovering new layers of complexity when it comes to the climate. What else have scientists been discovering? Anything about how climate change is directly affecting different parts of the planet?
Well, there's an interesting study that came out of California. Remember all that record rainfall we had last year? Turns out, despite all that rain, deep groundwater in Los Angeles is still depleted.
Really? I would have thought all that water would have helped replenish things.
You'd think, right? But this study used a new method called the Seismic Drought Index to track groundwater levels without needing to do expensive drilling.
Seismic, so they're using earthquakes to measure groundwater.
Not earthquakes exactly, but they are using seismic waves. They measure changes in the Earth's crust caused by variations in groundwater. It's pretty innovative and less invasive.
Wow, okay, so what do they find?
Well, it seems some aquifers, particularly in areas with lots of agriculture, might have actually collapsed because of overuse. They may not be able to recover even with all that rain we had.
It's a reminder that even when we get some seemingly good environmental news, it doesn't mean our problems are automatically solved. We need to think long term.
Exactly. Sustainable water management is key.
Absolutely. Switching gears a bit, there was another study that caught my eye. It was about biodiversity loss and the rise of infectious diseases. It just seems like we keep hearing about new diseases popping up all the time these days.
And they are connected, unfortunately. This study really highlighted that deforestation, climate change, the wildlife trade, they're all contributing to this.
Creating the perfect conditions for pathogens to jump from animals to humans.
Right, and as we lose biodiversity, those spillover events become even more likely. It's a serious threat to global health.
It's a good reminder that protecting wildlife and their habitats isn't just about conservation, it's also about protecting ourselves.
Exactly. The study also pointed out how much we still don't know about wildlife pathogens, especially those outside of North America, Europe, and East Asia. They're calling for more global surveillance to help understand and prevent future pandemics.
Makes sense. Speaking of unexpected findings, there's some research suggesting that brake dust from vehicles might be a bigger pollution problem than exhaust fumes.
Yeah, that one surprised me too. It's all those microscopic particles released from brake pad wear. Apparently, they can be worse for our lungs than diesel exhaust.
But aren't we moving toward cleaner vehicles? Won't that help?
Well, that's the thing. As we transition to electric vehicles, this kind of pollution could actually increase. Electric cars don't have tailpipe emissions, but they're heavier because of the batteries. That means more wear and tear on brakes and tires, leading to more of those harmful particles.
So even as we try to clean up transportation, there are these other issues popping up. It's like a constant game of whack-a-mole.
It just highlights how complex these environmental challenges really are. We need to be thinking about every angle.
It really is a lot to consider. Guess it just shows you can't focus on one solution without thinking about the potential ripple effects, right?
Absolutely. Everything's connected. Speaking of interconnected challenges, we should probably loop back to California. Their big push for electric trucks is hitting a few roadblocks under the Trump administration.
I was reading about that. Seems like they're having to switch gears a bit, moving away from mandates and more toward subsidies.
Yeah, seems those legal challenges from the trucking industry and lack of support from the feds have kind of forced their hand. That goal of phasing out diesel trucks by 2045 might be a bit harder without everyone on board.
It's definitely a reminder of how much state and federal priorities can clash, especially when it comes to environmental policy. And on that note, have you been following that whole debate about California's oil refineries? There's a lot of talk about potential state takeovers, right?
It's a pretty heated debate. With oil companies shutting down refineries in the state, some folks are thinking radical solutions.
State takeovers? That does seem pretty extreme. What's the reasoning behind that?
It's twofold, really. Want to make sure Californians have a reliable fuel supply and also try to stabilize those gas prices. They've been all over the map, haven't they?
Yeah, definitely.
The argument is that if the state owned the refineries, they'd have more control over their energy future, less reliance on foreign oil, too.
I could see that.
But of course, there are plenty of folks against the idea. They bring up the cost and the whole logistical headache of running a state-owned refinery.
Fair points. I guess it just goes to show there are no easy answers, are there? California's trying to shovel energy security, keep the economy stable, and protect the environment all at the same time.
It's a lot. And then you throw in the whole wildfire situation. Despite everything that's happened, they're still lagging behind on implementing those fire safety rules.
That is frustrating. Why is it so slow-moving? I mean, the risks are huge.
Well, there's the bureaucracy, for one. Plus, you've got pushback from the building industry. And then there's the whole debate about property rights versus the need to protect entire communities.
It's hard to believe it's still a debate after all the fires we've had. Seems like common sense would prevail.
You'd hope, right? But that's where we are. And then, of course, all of this is happening against the backdrop of a pretty divided national political scene.
Right. It's one thing after another. How are California Democrats even approaching this? I mean, how do you deal with the Trump administration's policies when you disagree so fundamentally?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Do you try to cooperate, find some common ground, or do you go all in on resistance? It's a debate that's happening within the party itself, really reflects the larger challenges of this political climate.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from politics and funding freezes to those fascinating and sometimes worrying scientific discoveries. Then back to the challenges California's facing, trying to balance all these competing priorities. It's definitely a lot to process.
It is, but like we always say, staying informed is half the battle. And hopefully these deep dives give you some food for thought, help you make sense of it all.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the news that matters.